Did you know that as an advanced practice provider or also as a physician, if you work in a hospital, you are probably not employed by the hospital system itself? I'm pausing for dramatic effect because you're going to answer me, right? I think most of you guys, if you are new grads, are going to say, no, you did not know that. If that's the case, who is my boss? Who employs me? These are all valid questions. These are questions I had no idea I even needed to ask when I got out of school and got my first job and received my first contract. And I was like, wait, who pays my paycheck? It's a little bit confusing. It's not something that's really talked about. And at the end of last year, I had a client who hired me to help her with contract negotiation. And this was one of the first questions that she asked. And it just reminded me of that like blank state of information gap that we all have when we first graduate school. As in this video, I'm going to be talking to you about the differences in employment structure between an RN and an NP. In specific, we're going to talk about who your employer is, who your manager/director is, who pays you, and who your colleagues are. If we haven't met yet, my name is Bree. I'm an RN, NP, mentor, interview strategist, content creator, educator, and welcome to the channel. Thanks for joining us. First of all, who is your employer? What I'm referring to when I say that is, what is the name or logo on your badge, on your coat that you are wearing? Who is the person who signs your paycheck? Who do you say, I work for this person or this entity? And for nurses and NPs in general, and this is broad generalizations, y'all, it is very different. There's a little bit of crossover, which we'll get to in just a little bit. As nurses, it's pretty straightforward. We're working for hospitals. We're working for government bodies like the school system or the VA. We may be working in a clinic setting. We could be doing home health care. And some nurses, particularly a lot of you out there right now, are independent contractors or 1099 employees working for an agency. Now, agency nursing, you could either be a W-2 or 1099 employee, but in general, most nurses, particularly those who are working in a hospital, are employed by the hospital system. NPs, on the other hand, are going to fall into just a handful of different categories. Most of them are going to be employed by a physician group, which can be private or it can be system owned, but is not, and maybe affiliated with the hospital, but is not owned by the hospital. Gets a little hairy. They also can be 1099 or W-2 contract employees working for locums. That's agency slang for providers, is locums. They could also have run their own clinic. They could be their own boss. And these kind of run the gamut. You could be in a solopreneur kind of situation where you have your own clinic and it is just you doing everything, or you could work for a small private practice group where there are just a handful of you, or you could work for a very large physician group. So private practice clinics, these are physician or APP owned practices, and because they don't have any primary stakeholders that they are accountable to like a health system will be, they get to decide how this is run. The owners of the practice are the ones who decide all the things about how this business is run, how it's structured, how the who the employees are that are hired, how they're paid, how everything is run. They have full autonomy over their practice. These are typically for-profit organizations, and therefore the livelihood of the company depends on how much income they can generate. Because of that, the practice culture is totally dependent upon the person who is in charge, who is the primary owner of this company, and or how is it structured if there are multiple owners, who makes the decisions. And based on what their personal values are, makes for wide variability in how they run this. I have met a lot of NPs who work in private practice who are profoundly fulfilled, rewarded, and happy with their practice because they are treated truly like family. People who are smart and forward-thinking entrepreneurs are the kind of people who value retaining staff, and they therefore tend to treat their staff very, very well, and they reimburse them very well. But there are plenty of other people who don't know how to run practices or just have questionable ethics, and they will run their staff into the ground because they only are looking at the bottom line. This can be like a phenomenal, like best place you've ever worked type of setting, or it can be incredibly toxic and unhealthy place to work. I've met people who work at both. Okay, extending on with this discussion, let's talk about private practice physician groups. These are teams of physicians and APPs who are self-employed. They govern themselves just like a clinic setting. This is physician and or APP owned managed, led, typically for profit, and they get to govern themselves. The difference is that now they have a third party that they have to work with. They have to affiliate with a health system. So they therefore have to maintain responsibility to the health system, which means in turn, they have to have a working relationship and basically comply with the values, motivations, and work structure or definition that is set forth by the hospital board and the administrators. So there's a third party that you are beholden to when you are affiliated with a hospital system. The cool thing is that if things go south, this physician group maintains their own structure and they can dissolve the contract or relationship with the system and go elsewhere. So they maintain a little bit of leverage with the hospital system. If they get into a little bit of an argument, they have a lot more like leg to stand on because they can walk. You'll typically see this in the ER setting, in anesthesia setting, sometimes surgical setting, and some of the specialty teams. Now the other side of things is going to be your hospital affiliated groups. So these providers are owned essentially by the hospital, but are employed by the physician group. So the person writing your paycheck, the logo on your badge, is going to say the physician group. Because you are more closely tied with hospital governance, you are now subject to whatever is deemed necessary as far as practice change, employment structure, pay, blah, blah, blah. All of this will be defined by the hospital board and administrators. They, in a lot of ways, are your boss. For the most part, these are very large groups, and it'll be like, think of it this way. If the hospital you're working at is called Hospital ABC, the physician group is going to be completely governed and structured by its own set of people, its own executives and administrators, and it may be like Physician Group A, who is affiliated with Hospital ABC. And generally, these are going to be large groups, like a large umbrella with multiple different specialties underneath that, like inpatient medicine, like an ICU team. You may have some surgical services there, or you may have some of the specialty services, neurology, infectious disease, different little subspecialties like that can be pulled into the umbrella of this. For the subspecialties like that, I see kind of equal balance based on the places I've been on whether or not they are group owned or whether or not they are private practice. One of the ways this is unique is that most hospital systems are not for profit. So their values are not going to be quite as much on revenue generation as they are going to be on community health. So sometimes the values of the group who's affiliated with the hospital may not necessarily align with the personal values and motivations of the people working for the physician group. Also, you don't have as much leveraging power because you can walk, but you're probably walking as an independent person. You're not going to take your whole group and leave at the same time. The benefit to these, though, is that for the most part, these tend to be a little bit higher paying. They have a little bit more layers of hierarchical structure, so there's more chain of command available in a place like this. You're going to have more of an HR influence. So there are going to be more layers of like buffering, and there's also going to probably be more options for upward mobility. The second point is, who is your manager or director? I'll probably use these words interchangeably, but I mean basically the same thing. It speaks a little bit to chain of command, but it's mostly talking about who the direct report is for you. Now, as nurses, we're used to things being pretty much the same universally in the US at least. Everything is very linear as far as chain of command. It goes up, 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 up. This is, I think, because most of us as nurses have worked at a lot of different places, we're used to this. We're used to knowing who we directly report our concerns to and then who we escalate it to. And there are generally well-defined people who are performing your reviews, who you're going to with complaints, who you would report to with a desire to renegotiate your contract or something like that. It's all very well laid out and defined for you to see. Support staff for nursing is more clearly delineated, and I find there's fewer of them. So if you work in a certain type of unit, you are probably going to have a manager, you might have an assistant manager, and you probably have a clinical educator. But that's going to be the direct line above you of support staff that you have. It's very structured. As a nurse practitioner, it ain't gonna be like this at all, okay? Just throw those expectations out the window. It's gonna get real confusing from here. And the reason is that there's just such wide variability in all these different practice settings. You may go work for just a team of you and a physician and maybe a front office clerk. You may go work for a large system that is affiliated with a hospital, a physician group, and typically those are going to have two sides. They're going to have clinical, medical side, and they're going to have administrative side. And they're kind of like yin and yang. It's not a linear hierarchy. It's more flat with a lot of different pieces in the middle. So it gets confusing about who does what. And so you may feel like you're on a little bit of an island without people frequently checking in on you. There's also much fewer of you. So you may go work for a place where there's a clearly defined structure. You may go to work for a place where there's a lead APP you would directly report to. There is a medical director that you would go to after that, or for issues with physicians. There's an administrative side where you would go to for evaluations, for raises, for bonuses, that kind of information. And it can be fairly well defined in some settings. That tends to happen in bigger groups, university health systems, large health systems where there are a lot of people employed there. There tends to be more hired support staff. Small groups, there's not going to be a lot of support staff, and it may not be very clear to you who you go to for what concern. You know, and then there's the other piece of it where different people do different things in these type of practices. So for example, my collaborating doctor is not my medical director. So who's performing my evaluation? Is it my collaborating doctor, my medical director, or my administrative director, or my lead APP? Like who's responsible for this? And it's going to vary based on where you go. There's no rules for these kind of things. I want to take just a minute and talk to you about administration when you are working as an NP. And I mean both the physician group administrators and the hospital administrators. As an NP, you have a lot closer proximity to all of these people than you do as a nurse, for the most part. And in some respects, this can be good, and in some respects, this can be a real downer. You're going to be a lot more aware of the overarching problems and maybe be hearing and exposed to things you don't really want to know about. On the other hand, you can kind of escalate problems to a top tier level pretty quickly. You'll probably see and hear things that are closer to leadership, like team development, hospital structure and or development and growth. You'll hear a lot more about how the hospital system and the physician group is funded and how you play a key role in the cog of this system, which is probably more of a negative than a positive in my mind. The administrative team has kind of two counterparts. So you have like practice management folks and you have executive directorship type of folks. And they do a little bit different things. So like on the practice management side, the functions are going to be things like helping you to expedite your credentialing, ensuring that you're billing and coding properly, scheduling, submitting expense reports for CME, ensuring compliance, licensure, all of those kind of like daily tasks of making sure that you can keep coming to work and producing for this team. To the executive side, which is going to be a little bit more almost financial focused on the employment, salary, reviews, that kind of things. They will be helping you get that kind of stuff taken care of. Ultimately, all this comes back to the big question, which is who is managing you as an APP? And there's no solid answer to this. It could be one of a lot of people. It could be one specific person, but it may be a person in a different role from system to system. It could be your clinical director. It could be your collaborating physician. It could be a lead APP. It could be an executive person. I've worked at places where nurse managers were my administrators. So it's all over the place, y'all. It's not as clear going into it. So you have to go into a job with lots of questions at hand about who's responsible for what and who you go to for what concern. Okay, friends, I got a segue for just a moment. If you are watching this and you are in the season of job acquisition, you have come to the right place, my friends. This is one of my most passionate subjects to talk about because I remember when the light bulb went off for me and I realized that, okay, it is possible to teach yourself how to interview and therefore land your dream job. It's not something that people are just born with or have magically. You can absolutely teach yourself how to do it, and it works. It freaking works, y'all. I did it for myself. I've helped people for almost 2 years now do this, and I just love seeing them land this job they didn't think they had any shot of getting. It is absolutely possible. So if you're in this season, please go check out my website where I talk about my digital course. It is entitled Turn Your NP Interview into an Offer Easily. It is 3 hours of video and 19 PDFs. You can work through it in a long weekend, and you will be prepared going into your next interview to sell yourself and convince them that you are the perfect person for this job, and it is the best feeling in the world. Third part, how do you get paid? Who pays you? RNs most commonly are W-2 employees, or some are 1099 independent contractors. The vast majority of them are W-2 employees. It's pretty straightforward. You get a certain amount of pay based on hours that you work or salary for the year. You are a non-billable service. There's not typically a lot of negotiating room in there. There may be some, but there's just not a lot of things you can negotiate. It's really just gonna come down to your rate, whether it's an annual salary or an hourly rate. Now, a benefit to this is that because they are required to maintain certain staffing ratios, they have to employ a certain number of people, and therefore you have a little bit more leverage because everybody knows we're short nurses right now. So you are a little bit more in command of your own destiny as far as how much you get paid. Also, because of this, when there are staff shortages, there are a lot of incentives, overtimes, additional money that they're going to give you in order to entice you to come in to do work, because somebody has to care for this patient. As opposed to an NP, there are a lot of different people who can kind of do your job, and or the amount of patients that you would have seen that day can be redistributed among the other people who are working. They're just going to work a little harder. But there's no like set rules about how many providers you have to employ. So I find that as a provider, they tend to offer significantly fewer options to entice you to come into work extra. NPs are similar in that they're going to be either W-2 or 1099. However, most NPs are going to be paid a salary versus an hourly rate. Most NPs have some opportunity to participate in receiving a bonus. Some NP contracts are going to be very similar to nursing. They're going to work similar hours. They're going to get paid for a certain amount of work. They're going to get shift differentials, possibly PTO. They may be a candidate for yearly raises based on an annual review. Some are structured that way, but most of them are not. Most physician groups want to employ NPs the same way they employ physicians. Most of these contracts will offer you an annual salary, probably with a bonus, maybe with like sign-on or retention bonus, annual bonus based on performance measures and or RVUs, like how much productivity you're able to produce for the group because you are now an income generator. Trading off this money, they want you to give them a certain number of shifts per year. It's an annual contract for how many shifts you will work for them. A lot of them really like the ease of scheduling with a 7-on, 7-off type of structure if you work in a hospital. The administrators that I know view APPs much more like physicians than they do as nurses. You are an income generator for this system, and many of them are structured in regards to how you generate that revenue in different ways. Some groups will allow the APPs to bill, which is going to be a certain percentage lower than what the physician would bill, but take some workload off of them. And some groups really just want the physicians to bill. So an APP would write a note and an attending would put an attestation, and the APP would bill incident to the physician. Either way, the difference here is that you provide a quantifiable, billable value to this team. And so what you will hear a lot of APPs and NPs say is know your worth, know your value, know what you bring. What you bring has a number attached to it. This is the number that you're going to want to use to prove your worth, to fight for your raise, because most places don't want to give you a raise. You're going to have to demonstrate for them what you have done to bring money into this company. It's ugly, and it's not something I was ever exposed to as a nurse, and to me it's a real downside to being an NP. I don't like it. It feels ugly to me. However, it does give you leverage and allows you to fight for more income in a way that you can't do as a nurse. Lastly, who are your colleagues? This is probably one of the saddest things, honestly, that when I transitioned from bedside to NP is that I knew that I would be going from working in a unit where I'd have, 5 or 6 other ICU nurses to sit around and chit chat and like help do our workload together and just work as a team. You don't typically have that with most APP teams. Very few teams of NPs have that many NPs at work on a given day. In my workplace, I think there are 9 or 10 of us, and that is distributed across days, nights, weekends. So on most days, it's me and one other person. Sometimes it's just me. So a lot of times you're just kind of out there on an island on your own. You may or may not be with your physician. You may not have a physician there at all. So sometimes it's a little bit isolating. Sometimes I miss having that camaraderie of my nursing friends around me. You kind of got to be at a point in your career where you're okay with that. And if you go to work in a clinic, it's really probably going to be isolating, because while you may be interacting with MAs and front office staff throughout the day, you may not see your peers at all during the day, possibly even the whole week if you have your own panel of patients. So you kind of got to be okay with a little bit more of that independence. The other piece that really makes this hard that I didn't fully anticipate, and that is staffing. So when you've got scheduling conflicts as a nurse, it's pretty darn easy to find someone to switch with you. Not so much as an NP. If you're the only one coming in, guess what? You have to plan to have taken that day off and have someone come in to work for you, because there will be no one there, or you come in sick. And I have been to work sick many times. It just is what it is. Somebody's got to take care of the patients. So you have less options as far as getting your time off and taking sick leave. So the overall take home here is that you are going to be governed and paid differently as an NP than you were as a nurse. Overall, this is still an incredibly rewarding profession. I wouldn't change any decision that I made personally. I think it just helps to know a little bit of the behind the scenes about what it's like, so that you can kind of anticipate what you're getting into. As always, thanks so much for watching my videos. Please, by all means, join me on Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time when I go live, and I kind of focus on professional and clinical topics. It's been a lot of fun meeting people on there, so if you have time, please jump in and give me your comments. I'd love to see you and meet you there.